Lipsa de motivare pe care foarte mulți angajați.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Kirklees Local Television's Public Eye. I'm Kyle Warwick and this week I'm joined by Tim Kingsman, Chief Superintendent of Kirklees Police Force. Welcome, Tim.
Morning.
I'd like to start, if I could just start by asking you, what would you classify your area of jurisdiction and what would you say your role within the force is?
Okay, I'm in charge of the Kirklees district, so local policing resources and delivering policing for Kirklees. So that's all the towns, Holmfirth and Huddersfield, Batley, Dewsbury, all through the district. And the main people I have working for me are our uniform officers who you see day to day and PCSOs, and then detective resources who you may not see but are investigating more serious crime behind the scenes.
What was your career path through the police to Chief Superintendent?
Okay, I've got 24 years policing in. I started at Keighley where I was a uniformed officer there, but I've worked through Bradford on our operational support unit as a sergeant and an inspector, and then I've worked Leeds, Calderdale, back to headquarters, back to Leeds again, and then finally I landed at Kirklees in September 2012.
Would you say there's a standardised career path through the police force, similar to the army?
You have to go through promotion boards to get promoted, but I don't think there's a standard path as such. I've been very lucky. I've always found an opportunity and passed a promotion board and gone to the next rank. But there are lots of opportunities for people in policing. Mine's been one in uniform and getting promoted, but there are lots of paths for people to do.
And I'm sure in your 24 years in policing you've seen quite a lot of changes. What would you say have been the most distinct changes in policing in your time in the force? Over
the years, I think I've probably put them into three. So the first one is I think we've become more responsive to the public. When I joined, we didn't really, sounds sad to say, doesn't it, but we didn't really care in one sense what the public wanted us to do. We did what the police thought was best, rather than actually listening to the public. So I think that's been one of the main changes I've seen. From about the year 2000 onwards, we became far more responsive to the needs of the public and what the public were asking us to do. I think another one is technology. There were hardly any computers involved in policing in 1990 when I joined. Now our day-to-day is run on computers, and you'll see officers now with handheld devices, and we're one of the first forces in the country to do that, so they can get their messages and the jobs they've got to deal with on the computer. They carry all the force databases on there, so they can check people out and look at photos and all sorts of things on those. And I suppose the third one's probably the advent of the Police and Crime Commissioner. About 3 years ago, for the first time there's been somebody elected to sort of look after policing in each area, so that's probably the third major change.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of technological developments, you say there police force now carrying around computers that have all that data on it. What sort of fail-safes are there in place in case somebody, I don't know, maybe an officer lost that piece of equipment?
Right, I don't know all the ins and outs and all the technicalities, but obviously they'll have a number of passwords to get onto the system in the first place. I mean, they are a normal mobile phone, a mobile device, but then they've got the police computer systems put on them. So there'll be a number of passwords. We will be able to stun them remotely and turn them off. And beyond that, I don't know, but they are encrypted, and you'll have to speak to somebody with more technological experience than myself. But yeah, we can stun them and make them safe if required, and it'll just turn into a normal mobile phone.
So how would you describe the average Bobby's role in modern society?
A lot of your average uniformed officer will be dealing with vulnerable people, I think, now. You hear people talk a lot about crime, but actually I think a lot of our job now is dealing with the more vulnerable people. Some of it will be crime, but some of it won't necessarily be crime. So we come across a lot of people who have mental health issues. We come across a lot of people who have other safeguarding issues. So your average cop deals with an awful lot more people who are vulnerable. There's almost a perception that cops drive around investigating crime or doing road traffic matters, and they're all important things as well. But the biggest growth is that dealing with the vulnerable side of society. Again, when I joined 20 odd years ago, people who suffered from mental illness tended to be in secure units. You know, there were big mental health hospitals. Those have all gone, so we deal with a lot more people out on the streets. I look at the growth recently in reports of child sexual exploitation. Again, that wasn't a problem that was as open back in the 1990s when I was a street cop. We've now got people who are vulnerable adults who are, as the population gets older, there's more opportunities, unfortunately, for people to become ill, to fall into problems and to be victims of crime in that area. So, and again, it comes down to technology. An awful lot of crime now is what we'd say cyber enabled. So you've got to use a computer, or you don't have to, but a lot of crime, computers are used in the commission of that crime. Again, it's all right for young 20-year-olds that are used to dealing with crime, but for some older cops like myself, it's not quite as easy.
Would you say that then, having to deal with more vulnerable people in recent years, would you say that has led to a necessity of changing attitude for the average police officer?
I think they've had to learn how to deal with that, and I think some of what we may not have seen as our traditional role has become more and more. So have they had to change their attitude? They've probably had to learn new skills, become more adept at dealing with a wider range of people. And yes, I suppose some things we wouldn't have thought were traditional policing responsibilities years ago, but now clearly are. So yeah, I hope police officers have always wanted to care for people, but maybe we've had to give them better skills and a better understanding of the circumstances that face people.
So Tim, how would you say that the political landscape changes or challenges local policing?
Local politicians are elected, aren't they, to represent the views of the community, so we've got to listen to them. I think it's all part of the jigsaw puzzle of policing. They will raise local issues that people clearly care about. I think where I've got to balance that, and my officers have got to balance that, is with what other demands are placed on policing nationally, across the district, maybe not in that specific local area. So we've always got that balance. It is challenging sometimes because with finite resources I can't meet the needs of everybody, and so we will have to make some tough decisions that won't always please everybody, including local politicians. I suppose my commitment is that we'll listen and we won't ignore the views, but that doesn't necessarily mean we'll always do what's after us if we can. And again, I come back to if it's not the right thing to do for that area and for the district at the time.
Yeah. I also work in a pub in Marsden, which is quite a rural area, and in that sort of environment you come across a lot of comments from people. You tend to hear things that people say. I'm going to throw out two comments that are probably the two that I hear the most from people in the pub. Firstly, I'd like you to react to those statements as well if you could. Firstly, living rurally, the only time we see the police is after something's happened. How would you react to that?
Some of that will potentially be true in that people actually, the only time they look for a police officer and when something's happened. I wouldn't entirely agree with it, although I can understand some of why it's been said. Obviously in a rural area there's less population and less crime actually for rural populations, so actually then less police. So I do understand that there will be a lower proportion of police officers than there would be, say, in the centre of Huddersfield, because some of what we have to do is respond to the crime and the demand that faces us. However, one thing I'm committed to for Kirklees is maintaining a policing presence in each community. So there will be, even in the quieter, more rural areas, there will still be their dedicated PCSOs, community support officers walking and understanding their areas. So I'm sad that the only time they ever see a police officer is when something's happened, but I do understand that there will be less policing presence as there's less demand in rural areas, but that doesn't mean they're forgotten, and that doesn't mean that we don't police them.
Yeah. And secondly, police are no more than glorified government fundraisers is another one that I hear quite a lot.
I disagree with that one quite strongly. I presume that means because of the number of speeding tickets or whatever they've got. I can assure you that we don't get any money from that. At the moment, the policing funding issue is quite a significant issue across the country, so lots of police forces, along with the rest of the public sector, are facing quite substantial financial cuts. I don't make decisions on whether we're going to make funding or make money out of it. I have to make decisions on looking after the public. My decisions are not at all based on, we're going to raise money or for the public. For the public purse. My decisions are made on what's the right thing to do to protect people. So no, we don't raise money, and I would refute that one strongly. If you actually look at the number of police officers that are involved in, speeding fines, it's very, roads policing comparatively, it's pretty low. So no, I would dispute that one, and that's not true at all.
Fair enough. You mentioned there about funding for the police. There's been a recent announcement that a lot of police forces are going to have to reconsider the way that they employ police in terms of just the amount of funding they're going to be getting from central government. What are the kind of things that Kirklees Police are going to be looking to do to ease the burden of that financial cut?
Right, well, if you look at the financial burden for West Yorkshire, and this is public knowledge, so I'm not speaking out of turn, but there is a budget reduction for West Yorkshire Police of between 30 and 40%, which is massive numbers over the past 5 years. So what we've done in the first instance is look at our non-frontline officers and our non-frontline functions, and can we make those more efficient? Do we have to do them? So we've looked at our back office, which sounds a horrible phrase, but is how we refer to it, but people who don't face the front line, and we've made savings there, and unfortunately that's made people have lost their jobs. Most of police budget goes into people. So we've looked at that, we've looked at our estates, our buildings. Do we need all the buildings? Can we afford all our buildings? And that means that some of our premises will at some stage close, because it'll come to a choice of either people, so your officer on the beat, or a building. And I think, unless people are going to tell me differently, that most people would prefer their officer on the beat. So that will be another thing we'll have to look at. We've looked at overtime, our equipment, our vehicle fleet, all those other things as well. But once you can't make any more efficiencies in there, the only thing that's left is your frontline officers, and going forward at some time that you will start to see a reduction in frontline officers. I haven't got any other choice with that. There's a phrase that some people have used, that it'll come to a choice between vulnerability and visibility, and at the end of the day I will have to prioritise making sure I deal with the vulnerable, and that might mean some loss of that visible policing presence. We've managed to avoid cutting frontline officers thus far, but I can't see that happening in the future. So we will have to change a bit of our style of policing, and it wouldn't be right for me to say what that is now, because I don't fully understand that, because we're beginning to work it through. We changed policing 12 months ago, and we reduced the number of supervisors in the police, the number of sergeants and inspectors, to keep the front line. That left us with a structure that works at the moment, but in another year or two may not work. So what we're planning on doing now is, right, what's the future?
In what way do you feel it necessary for local police to engage in anti-terrorism enforcement?
I don't know that I'd necessarily say that we deal with the enforcement side of things, because that's done centrally by a central unit, the counter-terrorism unit that's based in the northeast of England. But I do think that everybody lives in neighbourhoods, so local policing matters for whether it's organised crime, counter-terrorism or whatever. I think we do have to work with local communities to try and prevent the violent extremism, the extremism you've seen in lots of views, and try and get an understanding of other people and other communities. I lead for the wider partnership on community cohesion, because I strongly think that's an important part for policing, but also for communities as a whole. The more people understand about each other and actually communicate and live and work alongside, the better actually it is for everybody. So I strongly believe that. And part of that is dealing with that violent extremism that can move on into terrorism. Local policing does have a real place there. They need to get alongside their communities, understand what's going on. It will often be local communities that will identify those people that are at risk of being radicalised, and so they need to tell us, and then we can then work with everybody to try and prevent that happening. So yeah, a significant place, and but we don't do the enforcement as such, but we try and work alongside those people to prevent it happening.
There's a lot in the media about radicalisation of the Muslim population, which in Huddersfield, Kirklees area we have quite a large Muslim population, but as well there seems to be a big rise in far right radicalisation of young white males. How can you reassure the entire public of Kirklees that the police are dealing with all radicalisation rather than focusing on maybe one section of the community?
Right, it's a good point. We don't focus on one section of the community, we focus on it, wherever there is an issue. So yeah, you're right, there has been extremism seen in some Muslim communities, but let's be honest, by no means all. It's a very small number, and equally there are limited numbers in as you say, in white communities, and again, not many, but there are examples. So we would deal with both. So if you're extreme in either view, there will be officers trying to prevent on both sides. If you're engaging into criminality, I don't care what colour, what background, what religion you're from, it's against the law, so we will deal with it. So yes, we look across at all sides. What I would hope is that we can get communities to work together and actually to prevent it on all sides, and again, that's why I come back to, that's why I think getting communities together is really key, and I do see that policing along with other people have got a part to play in that.
So how would you say that you've seen society change during your time in policing? There's quite a big focus on the sort of extreme sides of society, and not really so much of a focus on the possibly brighter sides of society. How would you say, as a police officer, you've seen society change in your time in the police?
That's a good question, because 20 odd years. I think there's a bit of it goes in cycles, to be honest. I can remember in the late 1990s, we were in quite, not segregated, but there were quite extreme views ongoing then, and we saw that come out into the community, into some of the public disorder of the late 90s and early 2000s. There was a very significant incident in Bradford in 2001 that I was policed for several hours. Society, I think more, some of it is economics. When we're in the good times, I think that helps people move together. When you face austerity, I think that moves people apart. So, and I think we're fighting and struggling that at the moment. I think there's a danger that people will split, and this comes from doing a geography degree as well. There's a bit of my old academia coming out, but I think there's a potential for that to happen, and that's why we've got to work hard there. I think you have seen a change with the European Union and migration. We have a larger number of different communities coming in, a large Eastern European population from various parts of the EU that in 1990 we weren't even thinking about. So there's been a definite change in there. I think you've got to look at the change in society in terms of technology. I forget, are we on the Z generation now, or the next to come? And I think the way people interact is certainly different. My kids, the way they talk to their mates and play with their mates is completely different to the way I did 35 years ago. So I think you've got to take all of those on board, and I think that then changes society and thus changes the way we've had to police. I think it's never moved as fast in the last few years, and so as a police service we've got to move as quickly to be able to keep up.
Certainly in my line of work I get to go out into a lot of different areas of the community. One of the most striking areas has been going into different colleges around the region and seeing the kind of social togetherness that is in colleges and amongst young people. I think there's a lot more willingness to accept people of different race, colours, creeds amongst young people than there possibly has been in the last, well, in probably Britain's history. How do you think the police can take advantage of that youthful resource to help develop social cohesion?
Right, you're right. I do think young people are more willing to speak to people from different backgrounds, so there are opportunities in schools and in colleges to bring people together. I suppose my challenge to society, and I don't think this is one that is a police issue, and I'll come on to the policing bit in a minute, is that I think it's then down to parents and other members of the community that have then got to allow that to happen. I've seen elsewhere when I worked in Leeds that there were links being really formed by young people with the police and with other communities that then hit a barrier when parents, for whatever reason, and obviously deeply held views, then prevented that mixing or put a barrier in the way of that mixing. So we've got to work to try and break that down. For policing, I do think we need to be involved in schools. You know, we've got safer schools officers, as we call them, in Kirklees. We're striving to keep those within schools, even though funding's difficult, because I think that's important. Certainly at a young age, all our PCSOs are allocated to go and visit primary schools, because again, I think that's important that people, that they see the police there and that we encourage that interaction. And as I say, beyond that, there's probably a wider society and a partnership point of view rather than a pure policing responsibility, but we've got to play our part in bringing people together.
Simple question, what are your thoughts on arming the police?
I'm not a fan of routinely arming the police. I think one of the great strengths of British policing is that we're not routinely armed. We will have to adapt, I think, as society adapts. I think you will see more use of police officers using things like taser, and there are uniformed officers who are trained in Kirklees with taser. I think one of the main issues with routinely arming the police would be actually to train them to a high enough standard. If you look at the standard of police officer who's trained in firearms in this country, they are trained to an exceedingly high standard. Higher probably than anywhere else in the world. However, that means that they're volunteers and they've got to pass a significant training course to be able to use a firearm. Not every police officer in this country who's currently in the police will be able to do that, would be able to pass that. I'm not sure if I would, for instance. I've never been a firearms officer, but I don't know if I have the physical attributes to be able to do it. Am I a good enough aim? Have I got the mental capacity? So I'm not for routinely arming the police. I think we have to get the balance right. Have we got the right numbers of trained officers available on the ground, depending on the threat? But I'm not a fan, and I never have been, of arming the police.
What would you say some of the sort of fail-safes are in terms of the psychology of the officers that use that are trained to use firearms, that would put in place a sort of fail-safe against unnecessary harm to the public, say an officer armed with a taser, let's say? Right,
they all go through, firearms officers go through psychological profiling for starters, and you'd have to speak to the experts about that. But during the training I'm talking here more about firearms than taser, although the same principles apply. Firearms officers are put through regular training scenarios as to whether to shoot or not to shoot. Before armed officers are deployed in the United Kingdom, the drawing of firearms has to be authorised, although they carry them in the vehicles, in the armed response vehicles. Before they're taken out, there is a protocol to go through for them to be allowed to draw the firearms. And it does come down to training, and every time the firearms drawn or used, there's then a debrief and we look at the circumstances as to whether that was right or wrong. I used to be a tactical firearms commander. Every operation that I planned had to be approved by a gold commander above me, so there are lots of fail-safes before officers are actually allowed to deploy with firearms. Some of them do carry sidearms, but again, before they're allowed to draw them, there are certain protocols to go through. As to their psychological, it's in the testing and in the training. You know, you wouldn't be allowed to carry a firearm if you hadn't been through all that training.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to the tasers because it has been in the press recently about different officers and different levels of the police looking to increase the number of tasers on the street, and there has been quite a few high-profile cases in America of what you can a sort of reserve level called overuse of a taser, use of a taser in unnecessary situations. What are the kind of, how can you allay public fears that should tasers become more standardised, that they won't be overused in the same way that they are in America?
Right, again at the moment in the UK, every taser officer has to go through a training, so they're not routinely given to every frontline officer, and I wouldn't want to see us changing that or lowering the bar, as it were, for you to be allowed to use a taser. To use it, you've got to again demonstrate that your good decision making skills. And again, there are times when you're looking at whether it might seem right to use a taser, but there'll be circumstances, and the most obvious one is you don't want to use taser when there's a flammable risk, you know, because obviously then things set on fire. But equally, so you don't often see taser used with CS because there's a flammable risk. So again, the training, all of them go through regular reviews. Again, if a taser's used, as in it's actually deployed, and we've got to be careful here because some of the government figures recently have talked about taser use, which has actually just been where it's being drawn from the holster, from the pouch, and then pointed at somebody. That's a different use to actually when it's discharged, so actually the electricity that's contained within it is used on somebody, and the numbers of those are far lower. But every time in West Yorkshire and in Kirklees somebody draws a taser, there's a set procedure that will be reviewed by one of my chief inspectors. Every time that the taser is actually used and electricity is discharged, that's reviewed by a central unit again. So we've got fail-safes to check to see if the taser use is proportionate and necessary, and if it isn't, then we will take the permit off somebody, and while we're investigating we take permit off somebody as well. Right. So there are procedures and policies in place to make sure that we don't do that. Again, I think taser has been brought in a little bit on the quiet. I'm not sure initially if the public knew it was happening, so we need to be careful and make sure the public do understand that we're using taser, and that it is again by specialist trained officers, and it's not used without thought across the district or across the country.
How important then would you feel that openness with the public is important in maintaining trust?
We've got to be open with the public. You know, we police with consent is the phrase, but we could not perform policing in this country if we didn't have the consent of the public. So yes, we are open. Obviously there will be operational details that we can't share for clear operational reasons, but I've nothing to hide. If people want to ask me, I'm quite willing to talk to them about what's going on in Kirklees, and my officers are open in what we do and how we deploy.
However large or small your business, attracting new customers requires dedication and a lot of patience. Just like fishing, but you also need the right gear. Rods,
reels, lines, hooks, sinkers, lures, tackle box, tackle bag, net, bait, gas gloves, clothes, pocket knife, lunch.
Or you could simply advertise with KLTV. Online, grow your business and your clientele. KLTV, your vision made reality. Should have gone to KLTV.
On to drug policy now. In what way do you feel government policy to engage police in a sort of American-style war on drugs has affected the day-to-day work of police officers?
I don't think government policy tends to change the classifications. We go up, down, A, B or C. At the end of the day, I look at policing in terms of harm to communities. So I'm looking at the harm drugs causes to communities. And again, I am not in agreement with legalising the possession of drugs. I think they become a pervasive influence on people, and I've seen people I've known professionally throughout my career who have had their lives ruined by becoming addicted to hard drugs. So I'm not a fan at all of legalising drugs. War on drugs, phrases like that don't mean anything to me at the end of the day. This is about the harm that they're causing to communities, and there are some of our most serious and organised criminality is based on the supply of controlled drugs throughout communities. It was in the papers over the weekend. We had a significant drugs find in Dewsbury, where 40 kilograms of Class A drugs were taken off the streets by our regional organised crime unit. It's a significant success, but not one that we can rest on our laurels. We've got to keep going. But the idea that drugs are okay and don't cause any damage to society, I don't agree with that view at all, and I've seen elsewhere where that's not been the case. So would you disagree with the idea then that the illegalisation of drugs creates a situation where criminals can profiteer and create more harmful drugs than if they were legal? Right, I've seen that argument, being put forward, but Holland's often, or the Netherlands is often used as an example where they close, or don't necessarily legalise, but turn a blind eye to softer drugs. Well, I think if you go and look at some of their other issues, they have significant problems still with organised criminality, with gun crime. So I don't hold with that view at all, that we're making it easier for criminality to carry on running the supply of drugs. I don't agree with that at all. I think it would be there. And they would find a way of making money legally, which they would then use to finance illegal activities. So don't agree with that one.
Okay. What are your feelings on the way that police can deal with incidents of deaths or certainly illness caused by what are classified as legal highs?
Any sudden death or unexplained death, we would investigate. I think our responsibility then is to find the facts and put it before the coroner, and for them to pass up the chain. It's not for me to make the law as to whether something's legal or legal. That's for others to do. However, I do think that there are dangers, I think greater than maybe people realise with legal highs. Often it becomes legal by just changing a couple of chemicals, so it's not on the illegal list. But actually, I'd say to people, do you know what's actually in the substance you're taking? Do you know what effect it's going to have on you? And so I think there have been examples across the country of some tragic deaths from taking legal highs. Yes, it's legal, but is it good for you? And do you know what the consequences are going to be? The actual legality I'll have to leave to others, but we'll investigate and we'll pass our findings along.
Yeah. On to another topic now. In 1999, a public inquiry report found the police force to be institutionally racist. What has been done locally to change that perception?
I can't speak locally for Kirklees from before 2012, but as a member of West Yorkshire Police, obviously you're referring to the Stephen Lawrence incident and the Macpherson inquiry. There's been significant training, awareness, a different style of policing, completely different culture in the way we deal with people from different ethnic backgrounds. A whole range of activities to change the way we deal with people and we think about things. I do not think we are institutionally racist now. I can see why that accusation was made of us years ago. I mean, the whole recruitment, retention, the way we deal with people is completely different. You know, you had to be a certain height, you had to be a certain weight. All those things were not done to be racist, but adversely impacted on other communities. So there's a whole raft of things being done. I don't think we can rest on our laurels. We don't get it always right. There's a current review of stop and search at the moment that's been an issue. I think that people from ethnic minorities have found an issue with the way police have deployed that tactic. Personally, I think it's got a place as long as it's used properly, but again, officers have not always done that over time, and we haven't been perfect in our use of that. So no, we're not institutionally racist. There's a massive amount of being done, but there's more still to be done.
Would you say that you've seen the demographic of the police force itself actually change in the time that you've been?
We have, but I think it's fair to say we're still not completely reflective of the communities we serve. Partly that's because they're changing. So for instance, Kirklees is currently, the last census has a population where 20% is defined as from ethnic minorities, and I know that the police service we're still under 10% for Kirklees Police in terms of our staff officers and PCSOs who come from ethnic minority backgrounds. So although we've increased, society's changed as well, and we haven't yet caught up. That's not necessarily for a lack of trying. We do try and put a play out. There are plenty of opportunities for people to become specials and volunteers at the moment, and I welcome people from all backgrounds to be involved in the policing family, and we need more people to put themselves forward as well.
Do you think that perception amongst minority communities of the police force as maybe certainly Afro-Caribbean background, Muslim background and things like that, the stop and search strategy, do you think that leads into them possibly not seeing it as a good career option for themselves?
I don't think that's helped, and we talked earlier, didn't we, about young people, and I've seen this elsewhere where we can start to build good relationships with young people, but then because of events that have happened to people 20, 30 years ago, they've still got a negative perception of the police. I understand why that's happened because of the experience they received then, but I'd ask them to recognise that policing has significantly changed, and we do things differently, but that perception and that barrier in the past will mean that people are maybe less trusting, and we've got to earn the trust for people to come and want to work for us. I think there's also a change in certain societies. Certain people don't see us as that attractive. It's not a career some people want to go into. I think it's been a fantastic career. It's very challenging, but I've enjoyed my time in there, but people need to come and experience that for themselves. And yeah, that you're right, experiences of 30 years ago maybe are impacting on parental and people of that generation.
Yeah. In the work of incidents such as Hillsbury, you mentioned Mark Lawrence earlier, Mark Duggan, Jean-Charles de Menzies, how do you think the police as a whole can restore public faith that may have been sort of withered away in the last maybe 5-10 years?
I think we have to be honest about what's happened. I think that one of the key things that is a part of our trust is that do people believe us, and so we've got to be honest. And where we've made mistakes, we've got to hold our hands up and say we've made mistakes. I think the truth, that truth, the search for that truth has got to come out. I think some of the things you've talked about there are very difficult. The environment's changed massively for some of those, and our training and our understanding of public order, for instance, since Hillsbury is completely different to where we do then, and the whole of police dealing with football matches changed on the back of that tragedy. So honesty, putting our hands up when we've made mistakes. I then think people then and I do think this is a two-way process. Then people have got to not maybe go for the jugular with policing and accept that we're human. and that despite our very best efforts, we sometimes make mistakes. I feel at the moment sometimes when we make a mistake, people are very quick to pounce on it, and so if we're not careful, that'll make people scared of putting their hands up. We can't be in a blame culture. And I think then this is about day-to-day interactions. You know, people who come into contact with the police at the moment are very satisfied. You know, we get top 80s, nearly 90% satisfaction levels with policing, where people actually experience this. That's pretty high for a public service, and that's something to be proud of and to build on. But every interaction matters. So every time, I stress this with my officers, every time they go out, they've got to do the right thing for the people in front of them, and hopefully that will build up over time. And actually some of what you see in the media is about media. You know, it sells a story, and I've no problem with that. That's the world we live in, but we've also got to get across the facts to people. But those instances have caused, you know, loss of confidence in policing, and we've got to work to build that up.
Do you think the media could be more responsible in the way that it plays out stories of police failings, if you will?
I think, like lots of sectors, I don't think you can categorise the media as one thing. I think certain bits of the media do need to be more responsible. There are certain media outlets that go on sensationalism and will run a story maybe before they've got all the facts, but then equally there are bits of the media that are very responsible in their reporting, and locally I've got good relations, I hope, with the media, and I think they've been pretty fair in how they've been, you know, reporting policing in Kirklees, and I ask that you continue to do that as we go forward. So I think, yes, some elements have got to be careful with what they put out, but again, it's a mixed bag.
You mentioned there about the way that policing has changed with regards to big public events such as football matches. Would you say that violence at football matches is something that the police still need to manage and monitor?
Yeah, I don't think it's gone away. I think the events that you saw with the FA Cup game down in the West Midlands show that it's still not gone away. It's a joint responsibility, it's not the police's alone. I think something that sometimes gets forgotten is that the responsibility for safety inside the grounds is that of the clubs, and the police are only there to assist, so we don't lead on that. However, we've clearly an important part to play in that, but we can't forget about policing major events. Unfortunately, this country and others, Europe, there is still violence attached to some people who follow policing. So a lot of our operations about trying to deal with that small minority and thus allow your average football fan, and I'm a football fan, I love going to watch football, can get away, can go about their normal business and do what they're doing, which is to enjoy 90 minutes and hopefully see your team win. Child
exploitation has been quite big in the news recently with the cases in Rotherham and Rochdale. How can you reassure the public that the police is safeguarding the community against possibilities of child exploitation?
Right. The first thing, I've been asked in the past, can you guarantee that it's not going on? And no, I can't. Because it's a problem across communities and across all society that's been going on for a number of years and maybe hasn't come to the surface. But what I can say is that I'm very confident in what we're doing as Kirklees Police and as a partnership in dealing with it. Back in 2011, so even before I got here, decisions were made and resources put into dealing with the issue then, and there's been a strategy to tackle child sexual exploitation in Kirklees from then. Very recently, we've reviewed the number of resources specifically for policing, so I've put more police officers into investigating those incidents. The West Yorkshire Police has again increased the number of investigators by employing ex-police officers to deal with the rise in demand. So what I can say is whenever we hear of a report, we'll investigate it. If a victim comes forward, we will listen to them and investigate their complaint. We've got specially trained officers to deal with that, so we'll deal with it sensitively. Yes, it has been a growth, a growth in demand for us, but we've put resources in to deal with it, and I'm as confident as I can be that we're dealing with it properly. But yeah, it's still going on, and we still need to tackle it with the public's help.
And to what extent do you feel the police is an isolated organisation?
No, we're not an isolated organisation. I said earlier, or in the interview, that we needed to work with the communities. That's key. We can't police without them. But equally, lots of other organisations that we work with to deliver safer communities. So the fire service and other blue light services, we have a close working relationship. The local authority and various departments in there. There are a number of non-statutory agencies, voluntary sector we work towards. Bernardo's are a key partner with us in dealing with those victims of sexual abuse that I mentioned earlier. So no, we definitely don't work in isolation, and if we did, we'd sink. And I use a phrase that as the landscape gets harder and as money gets tighter, we've got to shrink together and not shrink apart. There's a danger as everybody cuts money that we run away from each other, and I firmly believe we've got to run together and work out where we can work even more closely together, or whether it might be that I stop doing something and another agency picks that up, and as a pro quo, I do something for them. So I think that's something that all of us will have to look at in the future.
What would you say is the one thing that you would highlight about policing in the Kirklees?
I think one of the best things about policing in Kirklees is the fact that we try and make it responsive to local communities, and actually by working with the local people in here and partners, we have seen some real success in reducing crime, in making people safer and feeling safer, and that's by a lot of hard work by the staff. God, I'm going into lots of things here, aren't I? But I don't think it's one thing, but the dedication of the staff, the working together with other people, to keep making people safer despite everything that gets thrown at them, I think is a real highlight. The vast majority of police officers care passionately about what they do and are trying to do the best for the communities they serve, and as long as we can keep doing that, I think we'll manage the challenges that face us over the next couple of years.
Yep. And finally, how do you maintain an appetite for the job 24 years in?
It's all I ever wanted to do. I'm very fortunate in that it's been everything I thought it was going to be. It drives me to distraction on days. It's very challenging, but it's very satisfying as well. And it's very important to me that when people ring up and ask for help, that the police are there, and that we'll come and do it in a fair manner. We'll do it in an impartial manner. We won't be swayed by politics or money or whatever else, and that we'll come and look after you. And that for me is probably why I joined policing in the first place, was to look after the most vulnerable. And when you pick up that phone and need help, that we will be coming as quickly as we can to do the best job that we can. So you need some resilience, you need a smile on your face, you need good people working around you, but I've still got the passion, and I will still do the best that I can for the people of Kirklees while I'm here.
That's great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was Chief Superintendent Tim Kingsman at the Kirklees Local TV's Public Eye. If you'd like to post any comment or questions about anything you've heard today, you can do so on our Twitter page, search @Kirklees Local TV, or you can contact us by email, info@kirkleeslocaltv.com. Thank you very much to Tim for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you again sometime. Goodbye.
Lipsa de motivare pe care foarte mulți angajați.
When they do the right thing.